Statistic or fact? 98 boats, over 6,000 pounds seized, 41 disabled, 39 captured intact, 18 sunk or abandoned. Those numbers tell you a trap worked. They don't tell you why it mattered. Keep watching to learn how La Corona del Mare ran like a corporate supply chain. Shell companies, offshore finance, digital scheduling, using radar-light composite hulls to mimic sea clutter and overwhelm patrols. We'll show how a Navy-anchored killbox flipped the script and how the FBI turned seized gear into a map of a $100 million network. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. At 2:48 a.m., a thin line of whitewater flickered where it shouldn't. Not a wave, not a rock break. A seam in the reef corridor started pulsing in a way that matched nothing on the tide tables. That's how someone saw them. Not on a scope, but in the rhythm of water forced through a shallow slot when 98 low-signature hulls slipped across the shelf at planing speed. On radar, they showed as sea clutter, a messy smear. In the corridor, they were a pattern that didn't belong. The corridor mattered. The tide sat just high enough to clear the teeth of coral, but low enough to channel traffic into a single forgiving notch. Current pushed west-northwest at a knot and a half, which gave the boats free speed if they held formation. They did. The first wedge entered as a scout layer. Two more wedges overlapped behind it at offset angles that kept wakes nested, not fanned. To any patrol ship sweeping a wide arc, the return looked like chop blown by a land breeze, not 4 engines knifing water. Chasing them head-on would fail. Fast interceptors break a swarm, but also scatter it, and every boat that slips through is a lost load and a new chase. These hulls were built for that chaos. Composite skins, foam cores, and minimal metal made their radar cross-sections tiny. Spray rails and stepped bottoms cut their wake signatures. Exhausts routed low to blur infrared. Each helmsman held on a cue from the boat ahead, keeping speed bands tight so no one threw a plume that would give the game away. They weren't guessing. The wedges acted like lanes, each with a job. Front boats absorbed attention and masked the center. Flank boats dragged the noisy water outward so a radar beam saw texture, not targets. The real freight ran in the middle third, tucked where the chaff of wakes made a living shield. Maintenance marks on later seized hulls, fresh impellers, synchronized fuel filters, showed they prepped as a unit to hit the corridor in one pass, at one tide window, without a single limp boat to spoil the timing. Overhead, a P-8 Poseidon pulled the surface apart. Not with one sensor, but with several stitched together. Low-power radar mapped the broad clutter. Passive receivers sniffed for cheap electronics bleeding on VHF. Infrared swept for temperature breaks where engines warmed the skin of the sea. The computer fused it. Where radar saw noise, IR found thin, straight lines of warm wake. Where IR couldn't hold the picture, electronic whispers filled the gaps. That feed went to cutters already holding outside the reef, shaping lanes of denial with quiet lights-out drifts, not sirens. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer sat off the corridor's mouth, heavy and patient. It carried the high-value monitor, long-range sensors, data links, and the authority to manage the stack. A Seahawk circled above the seam, dipping its light only when cued. Coast Guard cutters formed the outer ring, angled to force any breakout toward one engineered opening. Not a wall, a funnel. Depth, air, and surface formed a 3-dimensional box. They dialed the response carefully. First choice, disable and board. Second, capture and tow. Last, sink only what broke for the rocks or threatened to ram. Arrests talk. Sunk boats don't. When the wedges compressed into the single entry point, the signal went out. SEAL boarding teams lifted off the cutters and slid in from shadow, hitting lead boats with dazzlers and engine stoppers while the Seahawk pinned the tail end with a spotlight that moved just enough to unsettle, not spook. The killbox worked because it stripped away options. Speed turned into a straight line. Stealth turned into a spotlighted lane. The corridor that hid them forced them to choose between the funnel and the reef, and they chose the funnel. That was the plan. And those boats? They only carried the last mile of the story. What the FBI found inside their consoles, under their decks, and burned into their devices led back to the machine that paid for the fuel, assigned the crews, and set the tide clocks. The boats were the drivers. The route plan lived somewhere else. When agents cracked open panels and pulled devices, they weren't chasing spray anymore. They were reading a dispatch board. La Corona Del Mare didn't look like a gang. It looked like a holding company with a taste for islands. An office registered in one jurisdiction, a trust in another, a maritime leasing firm that existed on paper, and a string of fishing cooperatives that paid invoices on time. The timetables stitched into those accounts read like a freight network. Lanes numbered, windows assigned, penalties for late departures. Stopping hulls didn't slow that calendar. The money moved even when boats didn't. Transfers hit at night, fees shaved the edges clean, and a digital scheduler slid loads from one launch group to the next. If a boat burned a gearbox, the system treated it like a delayed pallet. Another crew stepped into the slot, another cove became the ramp, and the queue held. That's why the cutters took the boats, and the analysts took the spreadsheets. The hardware talked, but the ledger sang. What came off the captured hulls felt mundane until it stacked. Route cards sealed in plastic sleeves. Tide windows written as 4-digit codes, not hours. Handhelds with encrypted chat threads pinned to forecast currents. Maintenance logs listing impeller hours and plug swaps down to the cycle. One device stored a simple rule set. Wedge A holds 28 to 32 knots. Wedge B drops 2 knots at mile 6. Wedge C refuels at M13. The cards matched notes on fuel drums in a cove 2 ridges away. None of it bragged. It just ran. Their logic favored lanes over heroes. The layered wedges weren't just tactics. They were scheduled corridors. Launch windows matched current lines, not clocks. So crews moved on water speed, not wall time. Refuel nodes waited behind dead ground, 2 bends inland from known patrol drifts. The nodes looked like fishing shacks. The drums sat on painted pallets so forklifts left no metal marks. Crews swapped props, not engines, because a new prop bought 2 knots without flagging a parts shipment that customs might notice. Follow the money and the shell companies popped into view. Fishing support assets got leased under innocuous codes. Dummy cargo carried insurance that paid out when a storm loss took a pallet, masking real product with clean claims. Payments split through offshore trusts in thirds, each tranche landing in a different week to avoid single-point failure. Crews got paid through payroll apps under service contracts, not hazard bonuses, so the books read like seasonal work. If you've seen a legitimate shipping dashboard, this looked familiar at a smaller scale. Route planning software spat out predictive ETAs for each wedge. Spare parts moved through a provisioning list that flagged low stock at the coves. A maintenance queue assigned hulls by hours since overhaul, not by captain's rank. The difference sat in the margins. Stealth skins instead of AIS beacons. Tide codes instead of port schedules. Night entries instead of pilotage. One sat phone tied the strands together. Its call log hit a scheduling hub that never used names. It assigned hull numbers, slotted crews, and dropped points like dispatch tickets. A hull missed its window? The hub slid it to a secondary lane and advanced the next unit. A cutter seized a boat? The hub sent a message marked land route, and a warehouse inland spooled up vans before dawn. No speech, just codes and acknowledgements. That answered the question of coordination. They didn't wing it. They ran a commerce-level operation with digital dispatch and stealth designs married to tide math. With the timetable decoded and the trusts mapped, the mission stopped chasing wakes and started canceling routes, freezing registries, pausing receivables, and starving the hub of crews who now found their contracts flagged at the border. Stopping 98 boats mattered, but the real gain came from turning seized consoles, route cards, and sat phones into a working diagram of the logistics engine behind them. That blueprint let teams freeze shells, jam dispatch hubs, and cancel launch windows before fuel drums were even rolled out. If you want to track the next phase, watch the audits. Routes flagged, registries suspended, receivables stalled. That's where interdiction moves fastest now, on ledgers and scheduling dashboards, not just on open water. Today it was sea clutter and wedges. Next run may lean on drones and decoys. The playbook shifts. The watchdogs need to shift faster.